Greetings, brothers. Everybody on YouTube is going to have done a video either unboxing or looking at the rules of the Brutalis Dreadnought. Well, here in Scotland we don't have it yet, but I do have the rules, so I thought I would make an exciting video where we look at the Ironclad, the Redemptor, the Leviathan, and the Brutalis, and see if the Brutalis is actually going to change the meta. Are we going to field it for its points values? And then at the very end I'll give you my rating on whether or not I will be fielding it myself. Alright, let's get into this video. So thank you for being here, brothers, and let's start by looking at the stats. Everyone will have looked at these, but let's just point out the key differences between this and a Redemptor, because it is basically the Redemptor chassis, right? So it's going to be 170 points. You can put the Sponson multi-meltas on for 30. It comes with the Twin Icarus rocket stubber on top, 2 heavy bolters, which are like the nipple-mounted ones, 2 bolt rifles, which are basically in the fists, and then 2 fists. What's probably going to happen, though, is you're going to want to replace the 2 fists and 2 twin bolt rifles with the Talons. The Talons give you 1 extra point of AP. Each time an attack is made with this weapon, you can re-roll the wounds. So you're definitely going to be like wounding super reliably here. And then now you can sweep. And sweep is something that Marines have desperately needed, where it basically means that you can make 2 attacks instead of 1. However, the sweep is only going to be -3 and 1 damage. A little bit disappointing the sweep isn't 2 damage, or maybe we get 3 hits, but still, it's better than nothing. So, if you charge as Blood Angels, you usually are on 6 attacks. If you charge with Savage Echoes, you're on 7. So you're either going to be able to sweep for 10, if there was no charging, 12, or 14 if we're charging with Assault Doctrine up. So, pretty cool that we get 14 attacks on a Dreadnought. Yes, they are only 1 damage, but I guess if you're going to hit harder targets, then of course you would use the Strike, and the Strike is going to be very reliable. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you can put Chapter Master rerolls down on this Dreadnought, he's going to basically be rerolling all hits, and probably all wounds, right? And that's going to be devastating. That is going to be some of the most reliable, high damage close combat that we can literally field. What else do I like about this? Well, the Brutalis moves 10 inches, 2 inches faster than Redemptor, which seems a bit strange because he's got more armor on him, but whatever. He also has 1 more base attack than a Redemptor, and then he can be fielded with multi-meltas. And if you are going to be trying to get into close combat range, then you are going to be within half range of these multi-meltas. That actually gives him some really reliable shooting. Pushes him up to 200 points, so we're going to get into that later, but it does give him some really reliable shooting in that 4 multi-melta shots on the chassis, which I've just said could actually benefit from upgrades and buffs because it's core. You can sort of get like a double win out of the Brutalis in that if you give him Chapter Master rerolls for his multi-meltas and then also for his melee, could be very cool. What I dislike: 1, he's got no invulnerable save. 2, he's got no invulnerable save. And 3, he has no invulnerable save. Are you seeing a pattern here? These big 200-point models with no invulnerable save are tragically hard to make work in games because there's so much melta in the game right now, so much -4. If you ever come into an army that's running multi-meltas like this, you can probably expect to lose your Brutalis without ever getting to roll a saving throw. And that's the thing that pisses me off the most. Like, at least if I could roll a saving throw and maybe save on a 6, I would feel okay. I mean, it's not great, but I might feel okay. But when it's just like, oh, you've hit me with meltas, alright, you know, no saves, or you've hit me with Iron Hand las cannons, no saves, it generally feels really bad. And then the sweep does kind of feel a little bit underpowered here, right? Because if you compare the damage output from the Strike with your reroll wounds, you potentially do 42 damage. The sweep is only going to do 14, which makes me feel like when I'm looking at that, I'm like, why is the sweep not either 2 damage or 3 hits? I mean, other models that do D3 plus 3 get to make 3 attacks, and some other models that are like similar D3 plus 3 or maybe flat 6 get to do 2 damage. It's a weird one here, but it's good that we finally got a sweep. I guess we can't complain too much. We finally got a sweep as Space Marines, so I mean, I'm happy about that. So let's have a quick comparison between the Ironclad, the Redemptor, and the Brutalis in terms of survivability. The Ironclad is toughness 8, 3 up, 8 wounds. The Redemptor and the Brutalis are toughness 7, 3 up, 13 wounds. And I just quickly put in the green numbers is the percentage stronger or the percentage more survivable against those weapons. So you can see the Redemptor and the Brutalis are generally more survivable across the board than the Ironclad, but the Brutalis is going to be 25% more points than the Ironclad. So anytime it's like 23% more like this, or less than 23%, then technically the Ironclad would win. So basically you would say like Flamestorm cannons, plasmas, and las cannons are more deadly to the Ironclad, but the higher toughness of the Ironclad kind of means that it's better against storm cannons, multi-meltas, eradicators, power fists, and bolt rifles. Quite a bit better with the bolt rifles if you factor in the 25% there. So the Brutalis isn't winning any awards for raw survivability, considering at 170 points, especially if you push that to 200 points. If you push that to 200 points, point for point, the Ironclad is really, really almost keeping up. Maybe behind against a few like edge case weapons. Like strength 9 weapons will be better because they'll wound on 3s, but against like strength 8 and below, I guess you could almost say like the Ironclad is generally going to outperform the Redemptor / Brutalis. Now, let's talk about Leviathan, because they are kind of the strongest or the most durable units that Blood Angels can field, right? With 14 wounds, -1 damage, and 2 up, 5 up invuln. So you can see here that point for point, and this is based just on the profile it is. I'm not factoring in points here. The Leviathan is generally more survivable right across the board. Remember, though, it is 30% more points in the base Brutalis, and I guess if you put the Brutalis at 200 points, then it is maybe like 20% more. Maybe actually closer to 10% more. So somewhere, the Leviathan's between 10 and 30% more points, but against bolt rifles, flame storms, power fists, I guess with power fists, if we balance in the points, not so much, but plasmas, storm cannons, las cannons, not so much, multi-meltas, and eradicators, it's a lot better. And I definitely want to highlight those eradicators, because like one squad of heavy metal rifle eradicators, if the enemy brings in one squad, like 130 points, or maybe 135 for heavy metal rifle eradicators, if they hit you 4.5 times on average, your Brutalis is dead. So they're, and this is one of the reasons that I find it very difficult to field something like a 200 point Dreadnought with no invulnerable save, because if the enemy can nuke it with a 135 point model fairly reliably, and I guess the reason it's fairly reliably is because you, as the defending player, have no control over the impact. And what I mean by that is, like, you know when a character gets shot and you have to roll your saves and there's maybe one save left to make, and it's like, oh, the character's died, but he died on the last save, so I can pay my command point and 50-50 keep him alive. There's none of that. Like, you have none of that with the Brutalis or the Redemptor, because they typically will hit you with big minus AP and you'll get no save. So basically, it generally feels really bad to just lose a 200 point model without even getting to roll an armor save, but that is the sorry state that we are in with these 185 point Redemptors or 170 point Brutalis. So I really like the multi-meltas, and we're going to come to damage in a minute, and I would love to run Brutalises with multi-meltas, but 200 points feels very risky if there's nothing you can do as a defending player to influence the survivability. They don't have smoke screen, they can't be transhumaned, and they generally don't get to roll a save against -4 or above, right? So, a Leviathan is a bit more survivable, a bit more points, but a bit more survivable, but you could influence that. You could spend your CP and try and make that 5 up, which obviously never really gets modified because it's an invulnerable. So at first glance, I would say that survivability is the same, right? Like, there's nothing meta changing with the Brutalis. There's no reason to completely prefer it. That's kind of how I see it. It's just the same. Like, if you want a little chicken Dreadnought in the Ironclad to get up in the enemy's face, then you'd be no better off really taking a Brutalis. Maybe the advantage of the Brutalis would be the 10 inches of movement, but I mean, there's still a lot of no man's land to cover, and charging across that no man's land, you're going to be the bullet magnet. If the enemy sees you charging a single Brutalis across no man's land and everything else is like jumping from cover to cover, as we like to do with Blood Angels, you can guarantee that that Brutalis is going to take a lot of firepower, and these numbers don't fill me with confidence, right? Because I don't even think a Leviathan could walk across the board typically and survive. So If you do get some value out of today's video, guys, as always, I do appreciate it if you like, subscribe, or, well, and comment, and hit the bell notification if you want to keep updated on all my videos. If we haven't met, then I'm John, the Blood Angels Commander, and every week on YouTube we're doing videos designed to help you know your army and get the best out of it on the tabletop. Let's talk about the raw damage output, and I've basically started with melee, because this is a melee Dreadnought, so why not start there? Ironclad here in orange, the Redemptor in purple, the Brutalis in yellow, and the Leviathan in teal. Or cyan, I think it's cyan. Anyway, orange. Here's your Ironclad. It gets 5 attacks. Hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s if you take both combat weapons. Here it's his damage output. And if you compare this over against like the Redemptor, who gets the same number of attacks, the Redemptor is a little bit better against maybe like heavy infantry on Mortarion. However, against Vehicles, because the Ironclad does flat 6 damage, he pulls ahead. What about the Brutalis? Because he's getting +1 attacks. So +1 attacks means that he is better, again, against like Mortarion and the heavy infantry. Blightlord Terminators with -1 damage. But against Vehicles, he is still slightly behind in some situations, slightly ahead in other situations. And that is just because of the AP. Whereas like the 1 point lower AP potentially means these knights get a better save. And then what that means is the Ironclad is still your best vehicle killer. However, let's switch over and talk about the Brutalis Talons, and it's worth saying that I haven't included Savage Echoes in this. So we're just talking about the 1 attack from Shock Assault. I figure you're probably going to want these Dreadnoughts in combat earlier, so just they'll do a little bit more damage. I guess it would be probably about 16% more damage if you had that +1 attack from the Shock Assault, or it would be proportional based on how many attacks you had. 16 in this case because he's got 6 attacks, so 1 more would be like a 16% increase. If you have the Brutalis Talons, and you get to reroll your wounds, so it would be BS3 plus rerolling wounds on the Brutalis Talons, then what that means is it is now the best melee damage output Dreadnought we have. And when I first calculated this, I actually forgot to include the fact that it did get to reroll wounds, and I had to do the maths again. But it was worth noting when it didn't reroll the wounds, it had the exact same damage output as the Leviathan Siege Drill in like 4 of the categories. So I guess if you've played a Leviathan before and you know what it's like with the Siege Drill and you generally think that's strong, then the Brutalis, I guess, is coming in, I think it's about 15 or 20% more damage here. So in terms of like raw killing power against those big knights, or you know, -1 damage heavy infantry, or even something like monsters, then it is true the Brutalis is probably going to be your best option. It does a lot of damage in melee, and in fact it does more damage than any of the other Dreadnoughts, even keeping up with like the flat 6 damage in some situations here. So I guess they've kind of done well in terms of its profile for combat, right? It's not like, I wouldn't say it's meta changing, it's just a few damage above some of the choices that we already have, but it is decent. And I guess the reroll wounds does add reliability, and the fact its core lets you add even more reliability to it. So it feels like there's a lot you could do in terms of doing damage with the Brutalis Dreadnought. It looks not bad. Now, if we look at shooting, and for shooting, I've kind of said that the Ironclad has a melter gun and a stormbolter, but I think if you're going to run an Ironclad, I'd probably just swap those out for like a double heavy flamer. Gives it some defense to get charged, because you don't really want it to get chewed down or tar pitted by a crap unit. Couple of heavy flamers might be the best way to run the Ironclad. You could also just take a melta to try and pop something, but it's not a shooting Dreadnought, so we're ignoring that. Redemptor in at 185 points. I calculated all these weapons, the Macroplasma on high power, the Onslaught, the Rocket Paws, and the Stormbolter into these targets. And this is how much damage that you will do typically. We look at the Leviathan Dreadnought with the Grab Flux Heavy Volkites. That's 2 Heavy Volkites and a Heavy Flamer or Melta. Ignore the Heavy Flamer or Melta, they're not calculated, but the other weapons are. So this is roughly what you should do with the Leviathan. So you would do slightly less damage than a Redemptor, but you're likely to throw out a single mortal wound because you have 8 shots with the Volkites, you hit on 3s, so you're probably going to hit about 6 times, so you end up hopefully rolling 1/6 or maybe more if you're lucky, and you're basically a little bit behind in damage, usually less than 1 point, but then you have a mortal wound to throw in there as well. The disadvantage, obviously, of the Leviathan over the Raptor is Leviathan typically isn't core. Blood Angels typically don't run a Tip Marine, but I am running one this weekend to GT. So, but I'm not running Leviathan, so it can just go either way. But I feel like typically Blood Angels don't run that many Tip Marines, so Leviathan is a more edge case choice. But it does have survivability, and it does have survivability over the Redemptor. So I guess you have to factor that in. Now let's talk about the Brutalis with the Multi-Melta and the Twin Iron Tail Stubber. Its damage is not bad at all. Look at it compared to Redemptor. Against Blightlords, 2.81, 2.81. Against Dreadknights, 3.59, 3.7. It's ahead. Against Small Knights, it's ahead. Against Armoured Knights, it's a little bit behind. And then Mortarion is a little bit behind. But here's the interesting part. Those Multi-Meltas get +2 damage if they're ever within half range. I should probably just move my seat to tell you that the bottom right hand number was 2.21 with 1 mortal wound. If you're ever within half range and those Multi-Meltas get the +2 damage, then this is like the facepalm moment, and I may use this for my thumbnail. This is the facepalm moment where I say the melee Dreadnought has more damage than our shooting Dreadnoughts. Like quite a bit more damage, you know, like against a Small Knight, it's like 50% more damage. Against a Dreadnought, it's like 30 or 40. Against Mortarion, it's like 30 or 40. I mean, it makes me depressed to think that I've been using Redemptors all the way through 9th edition, and a melee Dreadnought has more damage. Just the extra reliability from the Multi-Meltas, and also you've got to remember as well, the Redemptors and the Leviathans, they both swing high and low. They're super unreliable in tournament play. I actually kind of have spoken multiple times about how I hate running Redemptors to tournament because the number of shots from the plasma is unreliable, and running Leviathans is kind of CP intensive, so you don't do it. So I guess what that means is, like, looking at here, it's like what you really want to be doing is running Brutalises for 200 points with Multi-Meltas. They're going to do more damage in melee, they're going to do more damage in shooting, and the survivability is kind of just the same as the Redemptor was before. I'm a little bit lost for words when you actually break all this down. Part of me feels like, while it's great that we get a new model, it's only 15 points more. I don't think it sounds like it should be more points, right? But like, I think even at 200 points, you're sort of pushing that into the realms of like, I don't know if I can field a model that is 200 points that has no survivability, and that's the way I would look at it, right? And I know you might say, well, it's tougher 7, it's -1 damage, it's got 3 up save. It's got survivability to an extent. Yes, against some armies it will survive very well. However, if you run this to a tournament, and the enemy is knights, for example, they'll just use their war glaives to instantly blow this thing off the table. If you run into Iron Hands, they will blow this off the table. If you run into like Harlequins, they'll jump out, or they'll just blow it up with their boats. Like, in some matchups they will be very good, but like there's so many matchups where they will be very bad. Redemptors are already super difficult to run, and then the problem with Redemptors and I guess the Brutalis is they're going to be in the elite slot. Maybe they could have put the Brutalis in fast attack because it is fast, but yeah, that's a question for another day. Anyway, I've got a bunch of thoughts. So the Ironclad and the Leviathan have Smokescreen, and all the other variants have Duty Eternal. So everyone's got Duty Eternal. The Ironclad and the Leviathan can potentially survive a little bit more with their Smokescreen. The Ironclad, the Redemptor, and Brutalis all have core. The Leviathan does not. The Brutalis is the fastest of all the Dreadnoughts, and its profiled movement attributes are much improved, right? Like when it's profiled, even in the middle bracket, so when it's like down at almost like, I think it would be down as low as 4 wounds, it's still moving as fast as a full health or a full bracket Leviathan and Redemptor. Leviathan gets tragically slow in the lower brackets. The sweep attacks do give us some much needed flexibility in melee combat. However, it does seem strange that there's not a sort of convention or uniformity between these sweeps, right? Because Angron does the same D3 plus 3, but he gets 3 sweeps. I had a look at Mortari and he gets 3 sweeps. And then some of the knights get 2 sweeps, or they get to do the 2 sweeps, but they do 2 damage. I think it's a great improvement. I just don't know if 42 damage versus 14 is the right numbers there. I kind of feel like it's not. I even said to myself, I should just shut up and be happy that Primaris finally units got sweeps. Hopefully next we can get some victories on the Blood Angels characters. Yes, we're desperate to get some sweep attacks on some of those Blood Angels characters. That would add so much versatility to the Blood Angels list. The Brutalis can also benefit from, like, well, Quake Bolts as well. Being able to basically hit on 2s in melee and then reroll your wounds is going to be really great. But it seems so strange that the melee Dreadnought will keep up or outdamage our best ranged Dreadnought. Yes, it's obviously got less range, but you're going to be trying to get it in close. And then that really makes me ask, is the Macroplasma fit for purpose? Is this a good weapon right now? I think the Macroplasma, honestly, based on these numbers, needs to just be changed to heavy 4. Like, it's silly, it's D6, because when I math it out in my graphs here, I math it out at 3.5, because if you roll a D6, you basically have a range of 1 to 6, and the average of that is right in the middle at 3.5. So at 3.5, it's arguably not. It sucks when it swings in tournaments. I think the Macroplasma needs to be heavy 4 minimum, maybe even heavy 5. I know mathematically these guys should be able to survive a decent amount of shots from Melta weaponry or others, but with AP4, my personal experiences with high AP and Redemptors, it feels really bad, and that's what I was saying. You have no way of influencing that whatsoever. Like, you can't go, I really need this to live, so I'm going to re-roll that save. You don't get to roll a save, and that's what feels really bad when you lose, like, you lose a 185 point Redemptor without getting to lose a save, or you lose 10 wounds off of it without getting to roll a save. Feels really, really bad. So I think if you want to include these Brutalises, I feel like you're going to have to take Psychic Fortress, which then adds more point cost, and then I guess that would relatively pull all the survivability and the other numbers down, because you have to spend these extra points. And you maybe have to take a Warlord trait to get Psychic Fortress off, and it gets complicated. And it gets exhausting, I guess. I have bought the box with the new Brutalis. It should be arriving tomorrow, the day after this video releases. But realistically, how or when I will run them is it's an interesting question. Alright, and then I had some final summary thoughts. So the Brutalis isn't standout in any of the following categories. Like, it isn't great on points, it isn't great on survivability. I guess you could argue it's a bit better in melee, like 10 or 15%. It's a bit better in range, 10 or 15%. It is decent at all of the above, and having the ability to sweep for the 4 times 1 damage at strength 7 minus 3 means that Blood Angels, you'll likely wound most enemy infantry on 2s because of our +1 to wound. So if you're ever fighting like enemy infantry that has multiple models with 1 wound or something, then the Brutalis suddenly, or the Brutalis, not suddenly I suppose, the Brutalis is a really good choice. With the right combo of core or rerolls around it as well, it could do some serious work. Now, the main caveat, I think, is Dreadnoughts always seem to require the rule of 2. People talk about it. If you're not familiar, it's a rule of 2 from Star Wars. There's always 1 master and 1 apprentice, and if you do not have that, if you do not have 2 Dreadnoughts on the board, what typically happens is your 1 Dreadnought eats up all the fire and dies and does nothing for your army. So 2 Dreadnoughts, no more, no less, is going to eat up 2 elite slots and 400 points. Which feels like so much. Obviously, due to the Arcs of Omen strategic reserve rules, we can start them in reserve, which could be very decent, because you could start within half range, get that top level of damage that you can't get from the Redemptor, which is nice, but 9-inch charge is never reliable. I mean, I guess they're core, so you can bring in a chaplain and try and make those charges more reliable, and maybe there's a play around doing that. It's very much lots of eggs in one basket, but it's possible. But the real issue for me, I think, is lack of invulnerable saves. meaning fielding one of these likely needs the 100 point or so investment from like a librarian, psychic mastery, and I can't help but think these aren't all that much better in most situations than a relic contemptor, right? Because we've already talked on this channel, the best way we think to run a relic contemptor is like a cyclone missile launcher, a twin Volkite cavern, and then the chain fist. And that's arguably a few points less, and it has a 5+ invulnerable save, and it does not get profiled, and it has really long range as well, so it kind of gives it a bit of flexibility within the battle. A single half-range melta shot into this, a single shot can profile it, right? Because, and again, you get no save. So like if the enemy has like, I don't know, a chicken dreadnought or a single squad of eradicators or something, a single shot sneaking through can do so much damage that and you don't get a save. Whereas a relic contemptor on one wound is still operating on full profile. I struggle. I mean, I think it's a cool looking model. I think it's got very interesting melee profile. It's definitely got a bit of shooting output. I guess maybe the way to look at it, and I didn't write this in my slides, is it a glass cannon? Right? Like, it does a lot of damage in melee, does a lot of damage in shooting, can't survive, is quite fast. I mean, those three of those things tell me it's a glass cannon. BAC rating, and you guys know that I like units that can sit on objectives and survive, or I like units that will hang around for a few turns and survive. I always think that if a unit lives one more turn, then it can always make up any like additional damage that's lost in the previous turn because it lived for a whole other turn, i.e. a whole other shooting phase, a whole other combat phase, whatever. So I'm going to say it's about 7.5 out of 10. I'm not sure it suits me. I'm pretty sure I'm going to run one at some point. And I think probably I will run them with the Psychic Mastery Librarian because I don't see another good way of running them. And I might even convert one of my Redemptors because I didn't glue the Redemptor's arms on and see if we can make two. I don't know what pieces we'll get in the box. I guess that'll be an interesting challenge. But I can't see this as overly game-changing for Blood Angels or pulling us out of our currently very low 45% win rate in competitive. I think a 7.5. I think summing it up most, it seems like a glass cannon, and it's a 200-point glass cannon with no invulnerable save. So if you can make that work, then more power to you. I'm sure I'll try it. And I'm pretty sure. I think I might paint mine one Death Company. We'll see. I already painted one of my Redemptor's Death Company. This might be numbered. This might be a Death Company Brutalis. Maybe one day we'll get cool rules for Death Company Primaris Dreadnoughts. Who knows? Or maybe it could be time to paint a golden Dreadnought. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below, what colour scheme are you giving your Dreadnought? Do you agree with what I said? Are you buying the box? Are you fielding them? Is there something I missed? Because I could definitely have missed something. I didn't really look at running it at all with the heavy bolters. If we go back to its slides, obviously it could run 2 heavy bolters and keep its points down, and you could just go all about the melee and try and kill chaff. I guess that's okay as well. I mean, that might be the better way of running it, because the second you put the multi-meltas on it, it's going to draw even more fire from your opponent. But yeah, overall, that is my thoughts on the Brutalis Dreadnought. I hope you found this video useful. As always, it's a pleasure to make videos for you guys every week. I always do appreciate the comments, and you are awesome for watching to the end of the video. I will catch you in the next one. Please hit the like button before you bail. By the blood are we made strong, brothers. Peace.